Today I want to talk to you about the importance of positioning our pelvis correctly when we're performing any axially loaded lift. And any axially loaded lift means lifts that are loading the spine or loading the back. And in the context of powerlifting, that's going to be the squat and the deadlift. There are many reasons why we need to position our pelvis correctly, and those reasons range from safety reasons, reducing risk of injury, as well as performance reasons, improving our strength. When I'm talking about positioning our pelvis, I'm talking about that in this sagittal plane. So I'm not talking about left to right or any twisting. I'm talking about like forward and backwards. You might have heard some people refer to anterior pelvic tilt or posterior pelvic tilt, and that's the plane with which I'm talking about positioning our pelvis correctly. We're talking about setting our pelvis in the right position so that we're not too anteriorly pelvic tilted where we have our back arched, or posteriorly pelvic tilted where we have our lower back flattened. So as I said, most people have an anterior pelvic tilt to their pelvic position, which is terrible for a couple of reasons. The first reason is it really decreases the amount of space you have at the anterior part of your hip, so at the front of your hip. So think of it like this, if your lower back is arched and your pelvis is dumped forward, the angle with which you have at the front of your hip is like reduced. So your femur is going to bash into your, hip essentially, so your leg is going to bash into your hip a lot earlier during the lift. The common symptom of this is people go down to the squat and they complain of anterior hip pain, and some people think it's like hip flexor pain or something like that. But a lot of the time it's not. It's actually literally you running out of space at the front of your hip to go down into your squat. Another reason is that our glutes function best when our hip is as close to like full extension as possible. I know that's a lot to take in. But basically what that means is that when we're in anterior pelvic tilt, our glutes are more on stretch and they're not as strong. Think of it like when you do a glute bridge or a hip thrust. You feel your glutes most at the top when your hips are at full extension. And you can think of this as a relationship. The closer you are to full extension at the hip, the more your glute max can be involved. So when we move into anterior pelvic tilt, what we're doing essentially is we're taking our glutes out of the equation, or we're reducing our glutes' ability to contribute to hip extension. And instead we're stretching our hamstrings, and which increases our hamstrings' ability to contribute to hip extension. So this is a really common, issue that a lot of lifters have, is that they move into this anterior pelvic tilted position to unload their glutes, which might be weak or might be just poorly developed, and instead overload their hamstrings to take the load that the glutes aren't contributing for. So at the end of the day, we need to learn how to position our pelvis so that we're no longer in this anterior pelvic tilt. It's extremely uncommon that a lifter is in too much posterior pelvic tilt. That's something that almost never happens. So the focus of today's video is going to be learning how to move ourselves out of anterior pelvic tilt. Now, the most common issue that people have when it comes to positioning their pelvis during their lifts is that they anteriorly pelvic tilt. And this is a result of postural issues that they already have before lifting or before they've even started lifting, is that they're in a posture where their lumbar spine is extended, so their lower back is arched, and their pelvis is anteriorly pelvic tilted, so their pelvis is dumped forward. And a lot of the corrective exercises that I'm going to take you through today are about learning how to position our pelvis posteriorly and learning how to control that. When we're squatting and deadlifting, we want our pelvis to be in a neutral position. We want our lower back to be neutral, you've heard that before, and you want our pelvis to be neutral. We don't want it to be overextended or flexed. And learning how to position our pelvis, firstly, has to come from learning how to control our pelvis. And this is the root of this entire video. We need to learn how to actually move our pelvis, move our lower back in the plane with which we're trying to do so. A lot of people really struggle with this, and they really struggle to even have the motor control or awareness about how to move their lower back. Now, the reason this is important is not that because we're going to be moving our lower back during our lifts. We're not going to be squatting and then trying to move our lower back, but it's about having the control in order to actually set the position and then hold that isometrically. Okay, so when it comes to learning how to move our pelvis and how to control our pelvis, like with any motor skill that we're trying to learn, the best thing we can do is regress it to more basic forms. So the most basic, most regressed pelvic control drill that I like to take people through is the cat-cow or the cat-camel. So this is kind of stage one. It's important because it's unloaded, as in there's no load through the system, you're on all fours, and it's very basic, it's in isolation, we're not doing anything else, we're not squatting, we're not moving anything else other than our back and our pelvis. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so we're going to be on all fours. I like to be on my knuckles, some people like to be on their hands. I've got terrible wrists, so knuckles is better for me. And you notice that my wrists are below my shoulders, my knees are below my hips. And all we're going to do here is move into full extension. Hold this position, move into full flexion.
hold this position. Now it's important that we initiate the movement through our pelvis. So don't do this, or I started moving through my back. Instead, we want to initiate from our low back, so like this. Hold that, and then pelvis first, then our back comes through. Okay, this is like the very first drill that I would take someone through. It's very basic, it's very simple. The emphasis has to be full range of motion in both directions and initiating the movement through our pelvis and through our lower back. Okay, once someone shows competency in the cat-cow, which is extremely quick, the time to learn that is like 1 minute. Like most people can do that pretty well. We can progress them into, or progress yourself into like the next stage, which is the exact same movement, but standing upright. So I'm gonna stand upright. Oftentimes it makes sense to stand in your squat stance, the stance that you're gonna be squatting in, and you're gonna do the exact same drill. I like to teach people to put their hands on their hips, and their hands are gonna guide the movement. It's a very similar movement to what we're doing on the ground, but with a lot less upper back and a lot bigger focus on our actual pelvis and lower back. So I'm gonna show you what it looks like. From here, I'm gonna stand a little bit more like this so you can see my lower back. It's full extension of the low back, and then complete flexion of the low back and posterior pelvic tilt. You'll notice that I'm not leaning forward or leaning back, I'm just moving my lower back. So there's no hip hinge, there's no thoracic flexion or thoracic extension, it's just the lower back. You'll be surprised to know that a lot of people actually find that really difficult. You'll see a lot of this kind of stuff, where the upper back moves. All right, we want to, as much as we can, isolate just the lower back and the pelvis and learn how to control this. Okay, after 3 to 4 sets of 3 to 5 reps in each direction, we can progress to the next stage of this learning process, and with that comes increased difficulty and increased complexity. It's going to be the exact same drill, but we're going to be in a quarter squat. Important things to note is that we're going to take our squat stance, we're going to go down into a quarter squat, but we're not going to be upright. A lot of people do this. Right, you're not going to be upright like this. There should actually be some hip hinge to this, so you should be a little bit more like this. And your back angle here should actually replicate the back angle you're going to have in the bottom of the squat. And we're going to just do the exact same drill. Arch the lower back, flex the lower back. Again, a lot like the standing version, you'll notice there's very little movement in my upper back or my chest. A lot of people do this, where their whole upper back caves. Instead, you want to keep your upper back still and just move the pelvis. Now, when people tuck their pelvis, a big mistake they often do is they do this, they let their knees drift forward. You don't want your knees to come forward. Again, you want some hip hinge in this position. You want your knees back here, arch the lower back. You might feel a bit of a stretch in your hamstrings. Notice that my knees aren't going to move very much at all. Flex the lower back. Hold that. So that's the next stage of this progression. Okay, after 3 to 4 working sets of 3 to 5 reps on that drill, we might progress to the next level of complexity, which is going to be the same thing again, but a lot deeper. So maybe a half squat or a 2/3 squat position. So you're going to be down here. Again, notice that I'm leaning forward. And what you're going to find when you're in this position is that your range of motion in each direction is a lot lower. You're not going to be able to actually get to full range in both directions, but do the best you can. So from here, notice, extend my lower back, and then I'm going to flex my lower back. Okay, I'm going to show you from here. So extend my lower back, and flex my lower back. So those are the progressions that I would take someone through in order to learn how to control their pelvis. Some people learn this really quickly. It takes 10 minutes. We just go through each one step by step. We get to the 4th stage, like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And we can actually start to integrate it with the bar. Some people take weeks. Literally, the standing version takes them weeks to learn how to control their pelvis and control their hips. So take as long as you need. Don't feel ashamed if it takes you a lot longer than you would like it for it to. Don't get greedy or arrogant and try to move to the next stage until you're competent in the stage that you're in. Really try to learn how to control your hips and pelvis in those main positions. And really you should be able to control your hips and pelvis in any position, but those are the kind of main progressions that I go through. Once someone is competent in that half squat or 2/3 squat, the next stage now is to integrate that with a lift. So we're going to go over to the squat rack and we're going to look at what that looks like when someone's actually squatting. Okay, so we're at the squat rack now and we're going to be integrating the stuff that we've learned on the floor into an actual squat. Like I said, the biggest mistake people make is that they
overextend the lower back. And what I didn't elaborate on before is that someone who doesn't have control of the pelvis or is not setting their pelvis in the correct position, they're the ones that are more likely to suffer the butt wink, the dreaded butt wink that you've heard before, because they go down to the squat in an overextended position, and then when they hit the bottom, they run out of range of motion at the front of their hips, as I described earlier, and then at the bottom, they flex the lower back to get all the way down into the bottom of the squat, and then on the way up, they return to their default extended lower back position. So if we can set our lower back in the correct spot, we can really do a good job of removing a lot of the butt wink that you will see in a lot of lifters. Okay, so now we're going to integrate the barbell. The very first step is to do the exact same thing we did before, but what we're going to do is we're going to take the bar down to a quarter squat. We're going to hip hinge heavily, so we're going to allow ourselves to lean forward. We're going to stop, and what we're going to do is we're going to move our pelvis into anterior pelvic tilt and then posterior pelvic tilt and find a neutral. And once we've found the neutral position, we're going to maintain that pelvic position and then go down into the squat. So I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like and talk you through it. So the bar's going to be on our back. It can just be in a high bar position for the purpose of this demonstration, and even when you're learning it, high bar's fine. And what you're going to notice is I'm going to go down into the quarter squat, and I'm not going to stay upright, but I'm going to lean forward like this. Stop here. And from here, we're going to extend our lower back. And what you might find is that you might already be extending your lower back in this position out of habit. From here, we're going to flex our lower back. So round the lower back. Stop there. We're going to find neutral, stop there, and then go down into our squat, finishing with our glute at the top. So again, most people, because of their poor posture and poor pelvic control, will naturally start like this. You notice the overextended lower back. We're going to try to find neutral by tucking the pelvis, keeping the posture in the upper body, and then control that down into the squat. So that's the first way that we're going to integrate what we've learned about pelvic control into the squat. The focus is about correcting the wrong movements that you're going to be doing. You'll more than likely start your descent by overextending your lower back. So we have to stop in the quarter squat position, correct your lower back position, and then once the lower back's in the correct spot, once your pelvis is in the right spot, then we can continue with the descent. Okay, once you're competent at this drill, the stopping at the quarter squat position, correcting your pelvis position on the halfway down, you're ready to progress to the next drill. The next drill is going to be the pretty much same thing. It's going to be a regular squat on the way down, but without the stop, but with a tempo. So we're going to go down across 4 or 5 seconds. And in that 4 or 5 second window, if you feel like you're losing your pelvis or you're overextending your lower back, you have to correct your lower back position, correct your pelvic position, but don't stop. Try to continue going downwards and kind of correcting as you go. That's the next stage of this process. So I'm going to show you what that might look like. So it might look something like this. So you notice that during that descent, I didn't stop, but I corrected my lower back as I felt it coming out of position. Again, this is the next progression, assuming you've done the first 5 or 6 stages before this point. So when you're at this point, you should have the skill set to have the feedback or have the awareness of where your pelvis is in space and correct it so that your pelvis is in the right position and you're not overextending your lower back. Okay, once you've mastered the tempo squat, where we're controlling our pelvis on the way down, the final stage is to now position your pelvis correctly at the beginning. This is where different people might use different cues. If you've seen my Nationals video that I posted about a month ago where I competed at the Nationals, you would have heard my coach, Will, cueing me hamstrings. Hamstrings here.
Squat.
Smooth start. That's because at the start of the squat, I kind of use my hamstrings to posteriorly pelvic tilt and lock my pelvis down. You might hear some coaches cue ribs down through here. All these things are targeted at the same point, and that is to position our pelvis correctly at the beginning. And because of all the skills that we've developed through all of our drills that I've shown you today, you're able to maintain that position of your pelvis and through your ribs and through your low back throughout the entire squat. And once you're confident of that, then we can start to add load and actually try to integrate it into your actual squatting movement and into your lifting. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you were able to take something out of it. The big take homes are we want to position our pelvis in the correct position, which is usually a lot more posteriorly pelvic tilted than we already are. Most people tend to be anteriorly pelvic tilted. The best way to learn how to do this is to first learn how to actually control your pelvis through really basic progressive exercises that I've shown you today. So start with a cat-cow on the ground unloaded and then work our way up into a loaded position. This isn't the only way to do it, but this is just the way that I like to go about doing it. You can be creative and you can add load in other ways. So for example, if you're not ready to use a bar, you can hold a small weight like a kettlebell or a dumbbell at your chest and try to do the same kind of movements that we were doing before. You can do them seated, you can do them in a whole range of positions. But the idea is that we want to learn how to control our pelvis and position our pelvis correctly when we're actually squatting. So yeah, that's the video. I hope you've learned something out of it. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to get back to you. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Today I want to talk to learning how to position your pelvis is important. Okay, let me start again. I can do it all in one take. Come on. Today I want to talk about the importance of positioning our pelvis in the correct, that we position our pelvis correctly is, there are many reasons. There are many reasons. Positioning our pelvis in the correct position. That was so good, and then I mumbled. Okay, I can do it, I can do it. I'm getting closer. No, I don't want to cut, I want to do it in one run, my back hurts. Fuck.